Every year I go to the D-Day reenactment in Conneaut, Ohio, and every year the wonderful folks from World War II Armor steal the show with their lineup of World War II vehicles. While I was at the event this year, I had the opportunity to talk to Rich, a member of World War II Armor, who's extremely knowledgeable about the Sherman tanks that they operate. I took this opportunity to ask Rich some questions about Sherman tanks in general and about the specific Sherman tanks that they were using at this event. So let's hear from Rich about these incredible World War II tanks, but first I want to remind you that if you enjoyed this video and want to support my work, please consider supporting me on Patreon through the first link in the description. By signing up, you get access to perks like exclusive videos from me that I've never posted anywhere else, and access to a members-only Discord server where you can talk with me and other history lovers about history and guns and whatever else. So click the link in the description to check out my Patreon and access those perks. Now let's learn about Sherman tanks. Take it away, Rich.
My name is Rich. I'm a member of World War II Armor. I've been a member of World War II Armor since 2020, but the organization itself has been around since 2016. Our group is owned by one individual who owns all this equipment, basically from this Sherman all the way down to the M7 Priest that we have down here. This gentleman goes by the name of Rob Thomas. He's actually a bona fide priest, and he's a gentleman who has done very well for himself in his life. And his idea is that he shares blessings with everybody. In addition with serving and giving blessings, we try to preserve the history of the Second World War. The idea is to honor the veterans who have come before us and to basically keep their history alive, and as you know, in terms of participating in this event for D-Day Ohio and Conneaut. So our group is based out of Orlando, Florida. It takes about 3 days for us to basically put all these tanks up on flatbeds, lowboys, and to bring them up. We also have a separate supply convoy that basically carries our members, the rest of the gear, the ammo, the weapons, and that takes about 2 days' time to go ahead and happen. Now, in terms of Rob's collection, or Rabbi's collection, it started off with a Thompson, a Jeep, and a 50 caliber. And then from there, it has grown to what we have, and this is only a fraction of our collection. What's behind me is what's called an M4A1. It's an M4A1 Grizzly. Grizzly meaning that it was made by the Canadians. This one in particular was built by the Montreal Locomotive Company, and there were about 163 that were built in total. None of these tanks that are Grizzlies ever saw combat. The reason they never saw combat is because by the time they were created and they were ready to go, the U.S. had already started its production line, and then you had the M4A1 over on this side, which is a welded hull versus a cast hull build. Both of these guns, 75 millimeter, they were designed to go ahead and support infantry, in addition with supporting infantry to go ahead and take out tanks. There's a misconception or myth that the Shermans themselves were not able to kill Tigers. That is incorrect. There was actually a British tank regiment called the Sherwood Rangers that actually did engage Tigers on D-Day +2 or D-Day +3. There was one gentleman who actually destroyed, if I recall correctly, 1 Tiger and 3 or 4 Panthers, so he became an ace in 1 day. So with this tank in particular, after service, basically it served as a trainer tank, and then Portugal, becoming a part of NATO after NATO was formed after the Second World War, ended up purchasing several of the Shermans, including this one, so this actually served with the Portuguese Army. After the Portuguese Army, it ended up being in I don't know if it was 1 or 2 collections before it reached us. The gentleman that owned it before Rabbi was based out in California. Now this tank in particular, we would call it a Hollywood tank. Hollywood tank meaning that this tank was seen on screen in the form of Band of Brothers. This tank itself was actually featured in the episode of Carentan when the 2nd Armored Division was basically coming in to help the 101st, which is kind of interesting because we also represent the 2nd Armored Division, the 66th Tank Regiment. In addition, with the Carentan episode, it also served as it was one of the British Shermans, and it was the one that was engaging the Tiger, where Sergeant Bull was basically coming. He was left behind in Operation Market Garden, and they had that burning Sherman. This was that burning Sherman. This tank was also supposed to be used in Fury, so what ended up happening was the gentleman did not want to send the tank over to the UK And so instead, the actors themselves came over to California and basically met up and trained on this tank. So Brad Pitt, Shia LaBeouf, so forth and so on, all of those gentlemen basically trained on this tank in some way, shape, or form. Crew of 5, you have your tank commander, your gunner, who also serves as the assistant tank commander. You have your loader, you have your driver, and then you have your bow gunner, or as they call in common parlance, or British parlance and Commonwealth, your assistant driver. You have 2 30s, one in the bow gun for the bog, one in the coax, and then you would have the 50 that's a 50 mount up top. Typically the 50s before. The 50s that are behind the hatch, they were specifically designed for anti-aircraft. And so typically what you would see is the 50s were mounted up on the back. It wasn't until a little bit later they were like, okay, hey, these 50 cals are pretty good against soft-skin targets, so let's go ahead and bring it up towards the front. So they started creating mounts up front as well. The issue is, if you're engaging infantry targets and you're on the back deck of a tank and you're shooting, but obviously you're exposed, so you can get shot at in return. So at least in this situation, the tank commander has some protection of being able to duck down. So tanks are basically designed on 3 concepts of either firepower, speed, and armor. You cannot have all 3. And the Germans proved that in terms of the King Tiger, because they wanted the most powerful gun, they wanted the strongest tank, but look at what happened. Then they're not fast. That's the same thing with the Tiger itself. The Panther, when the Panther was created, the Panther was supposed to be an answer for the T-34. T-34 is probably, depending on who you talk to, one of the best tanks in World War II. I would beg to differ. I would say the Sherman is the best tank in World War II, but that's another conversation. But the Panther itself was designed also to be a medium tank to counter that, but then the Germans started throwing more armor on it, and then it got slower, and then they had more mechanical issues. So this main gun is a 75 millimeter. It's designed for infantry support. However, the gun could take care of tanks, of other German tanks, Panzers, depending on the engagement. Typical engagements for Shermans were, you wanted to close into 1 kilometer, so 1,000 meters or less was a optimal engagement range, as opposed to Tigers. Tigers like to stay at range. So if the furthest you can keep out, like if I read correctly, the furthest Tiger kill was on a T-34 in the Eastern Front. It was about 2.3 kilometers. Obviously, these guns are not effective at that range, so closer the better. Over here on Arrogant Bastard, which is also a Sherman variant, it has the 76. The 76 was designed to kill tanks. But infantry, when they saw that kind of tank, they weren't as happy because the high explosives that were used on the 76s were not as effective as the ones that were found on the 75. So typically a regiment would have anywhere between 2 to 3 companies. Each company would be made up of 2 to 3 platoons. Each platoon is made up of 5 tanks. So typically a company of tanks would have about 20 tanks.
Okay. I could listen to Rich talk about those tanks all day. I really appreciate him taking the time to answer my questions about those Sherman tanks so that all of us could learn more about those iconic World War II vehicles. I want to give a big thank you to him and everyone from World War II Armor for taking such good care of those historical vehicles and bringing them all the way across the country so people can see them in person and learn about them. Also, I thought it was really cool that that tank was in Band of Brothers. After he said that, I felt like I was hanging out with a celebrity just by standing next to the tank. It was really cool. So that's all for this one. Remember to sign up for my Patreon using that link in the description, and I'll see you all in the next one.